I'm going to try and be quite quick because it's never a good thing to be keeping people from their lunch. I'm going to talk a little bit about the skills within social science, but I'm going to start by talking about what the skills are that are really required in terms of data analytics. If that's the direction that any kind of industry wants to move in, then you need to understand what the kind of broad skill set is that you need. So obviously data has created, it's creating new economies everywhere. People are generating new businesses, and a commonly coined phrase recently has been that data is the new oil. Okay, so if we take that argument and extend it to its kind of logical conclusion, then if data is the new oil, then you need to have ways of mining it, and you need to have ways of refining that data, because the data doesn't come to you in a way that makes it accessible for data analytics per se. Quite often it's messy, and it comes to you in forms that need to be processed in a way that will then allow you to use it for usable forms, for example, in the home. So what I want to talk about is what skills are needed to refine data. Well, there's, according to Nesta is an innovation foundation, and they've done a lot of work around looking at industry and business and how it uses data. And it outlines 3 kind of key skill sets. So if you're a business or an industry and you're looking to recruit, you need 3 types of skill sets, whether that's one individual with all 3 skill sets, which is probably highly unlikely, or you need groupings of people that fall within these skill sets. First of all, you need the people with the data engineering skills. So these are the people that are able to develop your robust data infrastructure. Big data is now too large, generally speaking, to sit on one computer or even one server. So you're talking about having multiple clusters of servers, and you need a kind of big data infrastructure for that, and people who understand how those data infrastructures work. You need people with the data analysis skills. So these are the analytical skills that actually allow you to use the refined data in order to generate information that will help you in your business, or to help you to develop new marketplaces, or better understand your customers. And then finally, you need business skills, which is a separate skill set which will allow you to then apply the insights from data. I'm not going to talk about the first one or the third one. I'm going to talk about the one in the middle. It should have got red, but didn't. Okay, so again, Nesta did an analysis of business types based on data analytics to try and better understand the kind of clustering of business types that exist. So we have, top of the food chain, you've got your datavores. These are businesses or companies that are almost entirely data-driven. So they base their decision-making on data and analytics almost exclusively. As I say, they're top of the food chain. They tend to be doing best in terms of analytics, closely followed by your data builders. These are your little beavers working away with big, massive data sets, which doesn't entirely drive the business, but they use big data to better understand their marketplace and to develop business decision making. You've then got your data mixers, which are kind of using data from lots of multiple sources. They're like bears, which kind of graze from a range of different food sources. You can see the analogies here. Data mixers, again, kind of slightly further down the food chain, because they don't tend to be using data so much for decision making, but they are bringing together different sources of data to better understand how their business operates and how it might be developed. And then you've got your data phobes, for whom the data revolution has more or less passed them by. They may be using data or they may not, but they're certainly not developing business that's data driven. So we've got this kind of typology of businesses. And based on the data collected by Nesta, they identified that those that are at the kind of top of the data activity food chain are they are able to reduce their costs, their operating costs. They are identifying new and better marketplaces, developing new and better products, and they are increasing customer loyalty. From an econometric point of view, the datavores and the data builders in particular, on average, when you take account of all other factors, are generating more than 10% more productivity than the other groups. And the other thing you find in terms of the kind of business composition is that those that are at the top of the food chain are more likely to be recruiting graduates. In fact, the data boards, I think, about 75% recruiting graduates. Data builders about 70%. When you get down to data phobes, you've got business, far less than half of the businesses are recruiting graduates. So there's a kind of distinctive pattern here in terms of the business workforce. So if you are wanting to recruit graduates, well, what is the marketplace that you're looking at? The UK higher education sector, according to a very recent review by Universities UK, consists of about 800 institutions across the UK who are delivering higher education. They are catering for more than 2 million students who come from around 200 different countries across the world. In order to cater for the kind of student marketplace, they've designed over 90 different types of courses to cater for different student types, and in terms of trying to meet the level of demand for both kind of theory-based but also practical types of course, and they're delivering over 1,000 different subjects. So as a kind of UK marketplace in terms of your potential recruits for your business, it's pretty big. Now, the other thing that the Universities UK found was that graduates have many of the skills that universities, that employers want, and that in the UK context, graduates are highly employable. So over 88% of all graduates are snapped up into the workplace within the first year, which is considerably higher than the EU average, which I think sits around 80%. However, they also identified that there was a need for universities and employers to work more effectively together. So there are gaps in terms of what employers want and what universities are providing in terms of graduate skills. So there's a need for university employers to better work together to identify those gaps in order to close them. In addition to that, there's skills mismatches. So quite often we've got students who are coming out with their highly skilled individuals, and they've got specific skills that would be very usable within specific industries, but they're not going into those industries. They're ending up drifting into other industries for a range of different reasons. And quite often that's because they don't really recognise the skills they have can be used effectively within particular industries. So there's a need to kind of better match up the skills that graduates have with the jobs that are out there. There's a need for universities to meet employer needs, for universities to be a bit more agile and flexible, particularly in this ever-changing market. I mean, one of the things about the kind of data analytics or industrial revolution is things are changing pretty quickly, and industries trying to adapt to that, and the universities perhaps have not been as quick to adapt in order to provide the workforce that's required. And then the fourth thing they identified was improving student employability. We've got many students who are doing fantastic things within universities, but they don't always understand how the skills that they're learning can be used in the workforce. So things like student placements, more internships or work experience opportunities. There's a huge level of demand for that, so that students can get a better sense before they graduate of where they're actually going afterwards. So what key analytical skills are needed to work with big data? I think there's 4 key skill sets that as an employer you should be looking for. The first one, which I'm not really going to talk very much about, is the programming skills. When people talk about programming skills, they tend to think of kind of Python and Java and all of these sorts of kind of computer science-based programming skills. But there are other programming skills that would be held by a social scientist, for example, that would be useful and might be something that you would look for in somebody's CV. So that would include things like coding, syntax. Have they worked with R? Have they worked with Stata or SAS or SPSS, any of the big kind of social science computing packages that give them that kind of analytical skill to work with data. Data management skills. So by data management, that's a kind of maybe an academic term, but by data management I'm talking about organising or handling or doing that kind of refinement process of your data? Can they take raw data and turning it into something that you can usefully use? And that's a very particular skill set, and something that if you are wanting to work with exhaust data, then you need to have somebody that can take that exhaust and turn it into something usable. So you need those two sets of skills before you even get to the data analytics skills, which are those skills that will allow you to actually take the data and generate understanding from it. And if you were an employer, you'd be looking for someone who can go beyond kind of basic descriptive analytics. Somebody who can look at data and see the potential in terms of, does it have a spatial dimension that we can take advantage of? Does it have a temporal dimension? Can we look at time? In terms of some of the things that Vernon was talking about earlier. Can they look at it in terms of a multi-level analysis? Can they deal with unstructured as well as structured data? So there's a number of different data skills there that you would want to employ. And importantly, I've added here data visualization skills, because it's all very well being able to kind of work with data and generate lots of numbers, but actually it's very important to have somebody who can visualize that data and understand some of the patterns that live within it. And I just wanted to give you an example, which is commonly used in teaching for social scientists, and this is kind of stark example of why you should never rely on summary statistics alone, and you should always visualize your data. This is typically known as Anscombe's quartet, and it's 4 different diagrams showing the relationship between 2 variables, x and y, and each one has a line running through it, which is typically known as a line of best fit, or a regression line, that tells you, that averages the relationship between x and y. But you can see that the line for each of these is identical, so the relationship appears from a numerical point of view to be identical, but if you look at the actual points in the graph, the shapes are very different. So if you, say x, for example, was some sort of unit production, just for the sake of argument, and this is your kind of productivity margin, and you can see that as x increases, as your unit production increases, your productivity margin increases as well. So if 16 was your kind of goal, and you wanted to predict what your productivity margin was at point 16 on this particular graph, you would be able, from this one, you'd be able to predict it fairly accurately. It might be a bit above or a bit below, but it would be fairly accurate. From this one, if you used this model to predict 16, you'd predict a way up here, where actually it's going to be a way down here, and so on. You see from the others that you would get different answers. But that's why it's important to be able to visualize as well as analyze your data. You never know what horrors might be lurking within your data that you might want to avoid. So what does social science have to offer? Well, if you look across the whole of the UK and you take that umbrella that Vernon showed you earlier with all the various different aspects of social science underneath, there are around about 900,000 students per year in the UK who are studying social science subjects, which makes up about 40% of the higher education total. So that's a pretty big chunk of our higher education numbers. The Campaign for Social Sciences did an evaluation a couple of years ago to try and identify what specifically social science students had that made them marketable, because actually a lot of the evidence in recent years have shown that social science students get snapped up more quickly in the marketplace than other forms of students. And what they identified was that social science students are taught to understand complex issues. And this is something that, having talked to a number of people from business at the Expo and also some other meetings that we've had, they don't want someone who can just come in and do some analysis. They want someone who can understand the context of the data and be able to interpret it as well. And I think social scientists are trained to do that. They're trained to research and analyse and evaluate data critically. They don't take data at face value, and they try to avoid misinterpretation by looking at it in a very kind of critical way. That includes questioning any assumptions that you might have about your data, and that's very critical, particularly when you're using data that comes from administrative processes or exhaust data. You really need to understand what assumptions you can make about that data and what you can't. They can understand people and institutions and relationships, and that, at the end of the day, what business and industry is all about. Understand processes of change, including theory of change and how changes within your business might actually impact on the data. and that's part of kind of learning about predictive analytics. They can make reasoned arguments and communicate and solve problems. So there's a broad range of transferable skills that social scientists bring. And I wanted to just finish by focusing, I'm not going to say very much about this because there's others in the room that will, in terms of kind of specialist graduate skills within social science. As John said, there's a kind of recognition that people want people with STEM subjects or STEM skills. They want to employ those people, particularly in the world of data analytics. But the STEM population can't satisfy that high level of demand. So increasingly, within social science, we've been teaching our students so they're non-STEM students, but we're teaching them STEM skills. And a good example of that is the investment by a number of research councils in the UK in improved data skills at undergraduate level through the QSTEP centres. There's now 18 centres or affiliate centres across the UK, and they offer what I would describe as social science degree courses plus. So they're offering new courses in data management, data analytics to a very advanced level. They also offer work placements, which you'll hear a bit more about later, and they put students on specific pathways into postgraduate study. And the most recent data that I have are around 700 students per year doing QSTEP courses, but more than 5,000 others who are taking QSTEP modules. So this is quite a big increase in terms of the undergraduate market. And then at postgraduate level, we also have a specific set of guidelines. So these guidelines are from the Economic and Social Research Council, but they're pretty much held up as a blueprint for how we should be training our postgraduate social science students. So in addition to all the kind of other things that you would expect them to have around research and theory and ethics and data, quite a large part of those training guidelines are about all social sciences being trained to a certain level of statistical literacy, and those who are doing more data-focused projects having a very advanced level of data analytics. I think it's useful to have guidelines like these because I think it's helped to set out a set of expectations about what social science postgraduates should look like. I'm going to stop there because I think I've probably gone over as well. And it's Mel next. So it's Mel that's keeping you from your lunch, not me.